Hi, welcome to Fireside Chats. We're at Tech Hub Live in this Moines, Iowa. My name is Renee Targos. I'm the group editor for the CropLife magazine, and today I'm interviewing Ben Craker. He's portfolio manager for AgGateway. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, good to be here.
And we're going to be discussing the topic from field to file, managing data across platforms, partners, and AI. So we're going to just jump right into the questions. So as AI becomes more integrated in agriculture, and how should retailers and growers think differently about who owns, controls, and benefits from the data they collect?
I don't know if it's really a lot different than previously. It's just new tools and technology that are coming out, being able to use data and drive insights in new and different ways. So I think a lot of the old best practices on having some agreements written down, understand what you've signed up for with different technology providers is key, and make sure that how that data will be used because a lot of it gets framed around ownership. Ownership is really kind of nebulous. Control is really the important thing. The example I give is not perfect, but if I own my car and I give it to you and you go do things with it that I don't like,
Mhm,
it doesn't matter. I still own it.
mhm.
So the control is the really part that I think people got to look at when they're reviewing the agreements and understanding what technology providers they're working with and how they're using their data. Because most of these systems are going to have language in there. They need access to the data to be able to use it and drive insights and do things like that. But making sure how far that goes, if they use it to train future systems and understand where it all gets used is probably the biggest thing to think about, which, like I said, is kind of the same as it's been all along. It's just a new tool that's kind of brought the issue back to the forefront again.
Right, right. So I just had a quick follow-up question for that. So are there ways that, growers have been burned? Have their data been used, incorrectly, that they have some trust
Um,
issues?
there's some examples I think where stuff got out. It's usually I think more of a general perception that they're concerned somebody's using it against them, or I think in the experiences I've had, most of the time growers are okay sharing data if it's somebody they know or they clearly understand what you're doing. They usually don't object. They'll probably be a little too free
Mhm.
in sharing data in a lot of cases. It's where they don't understand what's happening or who you are, that they get nervous because then they just don't know what's going to happen. There's been, um, you know, I think there's always this concern that companies are going to use it to move markets or do other things. I think that gets pretty hard for a lot of those companies to do. The practicality of actually doing some of that stuff is tricky. It's probably more on the local level on, knowing who's getting what yield on rented ground and kind of some of that stuff. That they really got to have that trusted relationship with who they're sharing data with, because that can have a lot more, I think, direct impact on what they're concerned about.
Okay. All right. We'll go to the next question. Many ad businesses use multiple platforms. There's equipment brands and service providers. What are the biggest barriers to making data work seamlessly across all those systems? And what progress are you seeing?
Um, so we So at AgGateway, we do a lot of data standard stuff to try to make that work a lot easier. So I think one of the big shifts we've seen recently is AI is helping with development. It's cutting down development times and everything. But we've seen a lot more shift now to trying to share the context between systems. So it's one thing to kind of define the API or the data fields you're exchanging. It's another thing to make sure that the meaning goes along with the value. So the example is, you get a CSV file with no headers on it, and you're like, well, I have no idea it's 7. I don't know what 7 means. So trying to make sure there's a lot more metadata and some standardized definitions and things that go along is where I think a lot of the focus is now, because the AI systems help make some of the software development a lot quicker and easier and faster. But then on the backside, you still got to make sure that that meaning and the data and everything goes along, because those systems are context is always talked about with AI systems. They need to know what things mean, how they relate to each other, and have all that clear so that they're not hallucinating because there's improper data that they're working from.
Okay. All right. All right. So trust, we had talked about this, trust is essential for data sharing. Um, so what practical steps can ag retailers take today in, protecting their data, coaching their growers on protecting their data? You talked about looking at contracts and, reading the fine
Yep.
print. Um, but, you know, what would your advice be as far as, especially with AI,
Yeah.
a lot of people using AI a lot more?
Um, so with the kind of the retailer grower relationship is have an agreement. I think that's something that a lot of ag is relationship. You make a handshake and you're doing business together, which works. But with a lot of this data stuff, I think it's important to have some sort of agreement. I know that's not 100% of the industry that's doing that with all their growers, but if they're participating in your precision program, or even if you're just doing a custom application, have it written down up front. Is the grower getting a copy of the as applied map? Who's getting what? A lot of that gets complicated on, well, it's rented ground, farmed by somebody else, and the retailer applied it. So who owns that map is really hard to figure out. So just doing that up front. That way feelings don't get hurt. Everybody's on the same page going into it, I think is the important thing. Um, then kind of as you're providing those services, most retailers are using 3, 5, 7 different tools to analyze data and doing a lot of the work. And I think that's where some of the due diligence comes in to understand how those tools work, how they share data, what other systems they're using kind of behind the scenes. Most everything's in the cloud, so they've got a cloud provider at minimum right now. The Amazons and Googles of the world that are hosting all that. So just understanding what you have to know what the agreement is with the company you're working with, but then a little bit of a window into what some of their agreements are, if they're generally a bunch of other third parties involved in delivering the tool. So it gets to be kind of a little bit of a rabbit hole, but just trying to be clear up front to understand who's doing what, and making some decisions on which tools you use based on how they're handling things.
Yeah. So that's a question I'm interested in. We had Women in Ag Tech yesterday, and Kieran Hildebrand was talking about how she's a grower and she uses AI and she puts all of her data in AI and then asks questions about, what should I do about this weather storm that's coming? And, all these sort of analysis. Are you seeing more growers do that, or are you seeing that it's still kind of a new?
Yeah, just kind of anecdotal stuff, but I know there's little different groups that have popped up where they're trying to figure out how to use AI, or even doing some vibe coding. I think that's one of the things we've seen where a lot of growers are making their own little tool. Like there's some little thing they wanted to do that they weren't a software developer. It wouldn't have made financial sense to pay somebody to do it, but they can go to AI now and do this little thing, and that helps out. I'm seeing a lot on just like answering questions about like equipment, like this broke,
Mhm.
and looking up like what's the instead of trying to scroll through forums and try to figure out what everybody else did, just the AI can spit out an answer in 10 seconds. Like, oh, I'll go try looking at that sensor.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of kind of quick practical things like that. I know we've kind of messed around, asked it some kind of agronomic questions, like you're saying. It's like that seems pretty reasonable. It
Mhm.
does all right on some of that. But again, that's another thing where you probably want to think a little bit about how much of your data you're putting in. Are the tools uh, taking all that to train the next generation of tools? Especially if you're on the free version, just assume if you're using a free tool, it's sucking up all the data you put into it.
Mhm.
So go to the paid one, $20 a month on a lot of them, and you can click the box to don't use my data for training future models if that's something you're worried about. If it's there's a lot of data that I think people aren't that worried about and can get value from the tool that they're okay putting in. That's good too. So
Yeah, because I think a big problem, and I've heard this over the last several years, is that we've got so much data, but no one really knows what to do with the data. So
yep.
I think AI, are you seeing any other sort of like trends or changes with growers or ag retailers using data to make decisions?
Yeah, I think Teddy hit on it in the keynote that it was pretty good on people are realizing there's a lot of gaps in the data. All the years of the grower putting in product one and field one and doing their whole farm that way. Now when they go back to try to
Mhm.
figure things out, I was like, what actually tank mix did I have in that machine? It's like, I don't know. It's really hard to do analysis when you have no idea what was applied. You know the rate and you know where, but you don't know what. So
Mhm.
that really limits it. So I think that's one big trend is trying to focus on data quality and completeness, and kind of the what they call a semantic relationship on having all the meaning and the definitions, and some different things that you can point to. So when it goes from system A to system B, okay, this tank mix is this tank mix.
Mhm.
We know exactly what was applied where.
Mhm. Okay. All right, we're just about out of time, but Ben, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us for the fireside chat, and I hope to see you again around.
Yeah.